Lopez versus Vasyl Lomachenko. Let's talk about the fight. I'm going to start off by saying that I'm not in agreement with the judges' scorecards. I didn't have it the way the judges had it myself. I had it 6-6, a draw. I had Teofimo Lopez controlling the first half of this fight, with Vasyl Lomachenko not having found his way into this fight till the second half. And there are those out there who are not going to like that, or not going to agree with that, but if you want my opinion and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, that's how I had it as I scored the fight live. I want to say that regardless of how you scored the fight, what costed Vasyl Lomachenko here was giving Teofimo Lopez a little bit too much respect in the beginning of the match. Vasyl Lomachenko, largely in part through the early goings of this fight, didn't do anything.
He didn't.
I mean, he didn't do absolutely anything. What rounds I gave Teofimo Lopez in the beginning of this fight were given to him not necessarily because of clean punching or effective aggression, but by way of ring generalship. That Teofimo Lopez wasn't landing very much of anything in the early goings of this fight, but Vasyl Lomachenko wasn't doing anything in the early goings of this fight. Whereas Teofimo Lopez was on his front foot, coming forward, and he was throwing shots. And even if those shots weren't necessarily landing, that was still a hell of a lot more than Vasyl Lomachenko was doing, because Vasyl Lomachenko, largely in part through the early goings of this fight, he simply wasn't throwing. He wasn't exhibiting any kind of offense whatsoever. He was fighting a very reactionary fight where the focal point must have been staying away from Teofimo Lopez's power, which I've no doubts is what warranted all that respect from Vasyl Lomachenko. I think that Vasyl Lomachenko was wary of Teofimo's power and wary of counter shots. He didn't want to open up on this guy while he's still fresh, while he's still got a full tank, because if he does, and by some chance something gets through for Teofimo, he's a strong enough puncher that it could put Vasyl Lomachenko down and could put him out. Thus, Vasyl Lomachenko, he didn't open up for at least the first 5 rounds of this fight. And I think, regardless of how you scored it, regardless of how I scored it, or the judges scored it, regardless of anything, I do feel that that costed him greatly. I remember as I was watching this fight and scoring it, I had the fight 5-0 going into the 6th.
Clean sweep.
And I think that, depending on who you ask, the scoring, the overall scoring for this fight is going to vary greatly from person to person. But I think that the one thing that we can all agree on is that a large chunk of this fight, a large chunk of the early portion of this fight, was won by Teofimo Lopez. I want to say that, moving forward, discussing the scoring in this match, it is going to be a bit of a mess, because a large number of people who aren't necessarily Teofimo Lopez's fans wanted Vasyl Lomachenko to lose this fight, and Teofimo was just the latest guy that they chose to get behind so that Vasyl Lomachenko could be unseated and defeated. There are those people. I've got guys telling me they scored the fight 10-2 in favor of Teofimo Lopez, and I simply cannot reconcile that. I can't wrap my mind around it. Moving forwards, it is going to be difficult discussing the scoring in this fight, because a lot of different people had it a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. There were people out there who wanted nothing else but for Vasyl Lomachenko to lose this fight. And Teofimo Lopez was just the latest guy they decided to get behind, not for support of Teofimo, but for hate of Vasyl Lomachenko. Yes, there were those people. At the same time, there were those other people who were avid supporters of Teofimo Lopez, and they scored it wide in his favor, though their candor is just as tainted as the aforementioned group's candor. You obviously have a pony in the show. You obviously have a pony in the race. So of course you're going to say those kinds of things and give up those kinds of scores. Ultimately, what I feel shouldn't get lost in translation, what I feel shouldn't get lost in the sauce, is that Teofimo Lopez had the courage to do what Gervonta Davis would not do. And if nothing else, what he exhibited last night is that against Vasyl Lomachenko, he is not out of place. He belongs. Now just back to the fight and what rounds did go to Vasyl Lomachenko. It seems to me the plan of action for Lomachenko was to tire Teofimo Lopez out, to take him into deep waters, take him into those championship rounds. Because Teofimo Lopez is a fighter who, more often than not, doesn't go the distance. Teofimo Lopez's fights usually end rather abruptly. The Masayoshi Nakatani fight was one of the few fights where Teofimo Lopez went the distance with a guy. More often than not, Teofimo stops his opponents. And it seems that what Lomachenko was banking on was Teofimo Lopez's gas tank being spent, so that he would thereby slow down and allow Vasyl Lomachenko, once Teofimo Lopez tires, to seize control of the match. In truth, it's not the worst plan of action I've ever heard. It actually makes a lot of sense. I just don't think it was executed properly. I think that Vasyl Lomachenko took a little bit too long to start doing stuff out there. But he did find his way into the fight in the second half. And when he did, there seemed to be very little that Teofimo Lopez could do about it. Connecting with very short punches, mid-range to inside, getting under Lopez's sweeping hooks and continuing to pepper him with shots. At this point, it's Vasyl Lomachenko that's backing off Teofimo Lopez, who didn't have the same snap in his punches in the second half of the fight that he did in the first. And the difference for me, one of the glaring differences, is that while I definitely had Teofimo Lopez picking up the first half of the fight, it wasn't through effective aggression, it wasn't through clean punching or defense per se, it was simply ring generalship. That one of these guys is a lot busier than the other, whereas once Vasyl Lomachenko finally decided to let his hands go, there was your clean punching, there was your effective aggression, and your ring generalship.
They both picked up rounds, but for different reasons.
That was one of the glaring differences for me, that once Vasyl Lomachenko finally did let his hands go, he couldn't miss Teofimo Lopez. Though, if I'm being honest, once Vasyl Lomachenko started picking up rounds, I was still of the opinion that he's got to do more, he's got to show more. This guy needs a knockdown to make it decisive. Those who watch the fight with me live will know that. Vasyl Lomachenko appeared to be lacking enough power, enough pop in those punches to make it decisive. Drop this guy!
Because this is still a very close fight.
We saw Vasyl Lomachenko, by way of those fancy feet, maneuvering on the inside of Teofimo Lopez and peppering him with short punches, very short shots that were getting through, that were connecting. But even as he started connecting those punches and picking up those rounds, at least on my card, there was a feeling of, it's a day late and a dollar short. It's too little, too late. You've started this fight off at a severe deficit, and the most that you can hope for now is a draw, which is how I had it. 6 rounds to 6.
As far as I'm concerned, he waited too long.
So whether I decide to go by the actual judges' scorecards or my own, the feeling remains that Vasyl Lomachenko took too long to get into this fight, and it costed him. And that was out of respect for Teofimo Lopez's power, that was out of respect for Teofimo Lopez's speed, reflexes, and counterpunching.
And size.
Vasyl Lomachenko was not the man he was with Teofimo Lopez that he was with Guillermo Rigondeaux, or Nicholas Walters, or Jason Sosa, or Jorge Linares, or Luke Campbell. Put simply, whether it was deliberate or not, I've never seen Vasyl Lomachenko lose so many rounds in succession consecutively, but that's very much what I saw in the early goings of this fight. Maybe it was strategy.
Maybe it was.
Maybe it wasn't. But one way or another, Vasyl Lomachenko waited far too long for my tastes to make a fight out of this. I think it's a great pity that a rematch clause was not incorporated into the contract for this match, that this is basically a one-and-done situation. Teofimo and his team have every intention of moving on after this to 140 pounds, which is a more comfortable weight for him.
So there ain't going to be no second fight.
I think that, having seen the fight, this was an intriguing enough matchup that I wouldn't have minded getting 2 fights out of this thing, but, that's just not the way the cookie's going to crumble. The question then becomes, where does Teofimo Lopez go from here, and where does Vasyl Lomachenko go from here? I think it's very beneficial to top rank that a young fighter like Teofimo Lopez emerged the victor in this contest because he's got a lot more upside than Vasyl Lomachenko and a lot more appeal. Teofimo Lopez, for what it's worth, is a more marketable fighter, at least on this side of the world, than Vasyl Lomachenko is, who in spite of his high boxing IQ and accolades, never really took off in this part of the world. Oh, the boxing snobs and the pundits might have rated him highly, but he never really became a household name. And Teofimo Lopez has the potential to become that.
He's got star power.
He's got star quality. He's got an exciting, fan-friendly style, and he's got the right attitude. He believes in himself. He walked into this fight with only 15 professional bouts, 15 professional contests, whereas fighters like Gervonta Davis have spent the last 3 years swerving a fight with Vasyl Lomachenko. Well, not Teofimo Lopez. He's made out of different stuff. And I think that the fans on this side of the world, even the ones who were backing Vasyl Lomachenko to win, the level-headed ones, I think that they can appreciate that. If nothing else, I think that they can appreciate that Teofimo was willing to go in there and do what a fighter like Gervonta Davis was not willing to go in there and do. That commands respect. The kind of respect that now Gervonta Davis can never get, can never achieve. You let someone else come in and win your brass ring.
Could have been you.
So anything you do now with Vasyl Lomachenko, not that I think he's going to fight him because I don't, but even if he were, and even if he were to beat him, it would be a tainted victory. You waited good up until somebody else came along and unseated this guy.
Beat this guy.
Before you felt comfortable enough, confident enough to fight him.
You don't get cool points for that.
There's no award. There are no accolades for Gervonta Davis feasting on smaller, unheralded fighters, while courageous young champions like Teofimo Lopez take it upon themselves to make a statement. Teofimo Lopez has a level of respect here and now that a fighter like Gervonta Davis can never and will never achieve.
Because nobody likes that fucking guy.
Sky's the limit for Teofimo Lopez, though there is a question as to whether or not he will face the winner of Taylor versus Ramirez. And I stand by my original assertion that while I do think it's possible for Teofimo Lopez to become a two-division champion, I don't think it will be by way of fighting the fighter who wins that fight. The fighter who wins that fight in all likelihood will fight Jack Catterall thereafter and subsequently move up to the welterweight division. So if Teofimo wins a belt at 140 pounds from somebody,
It ain't gonna be those guys.
I'd sooner believe that the winner of Taylor versus Ramirez will move up to the welterweight division immediately after that undisputed title fight, and Teofimo would end up fighting, I don't know, Jack Catterall for the vacant WBO once all those titles are vacated. I'd sooner believe that Teofimo, upon his ascent to the 140-pound division, fights either a Jack Catterall or a Jose Zapata, maybe a Pablo Cano, instead of the winner, Taylor versus Ramirez. The winner of that fight, in all likelihood, will move up subsequently thereafter, regardless of what they told Jack, regardless of what they had to tell that guy to get him to stand down and step aside so the two unified champions could lock horns with each other. Regardless of that, I'd sooner believe the winner of that fight would move up to the welterweight division immediately thereafter, and, Jack's shot might come against Teofimo, who some regard as the undisputed lightweight champion, though not myself, and I've specified this many times in the past. Whatever WBC designation Teofimo won from Vasyl Lomachenko, it's not a world title. And by definition, what makes an undisputed title fight an undisputed title fight is that all the world titles are on the line, not all the franchise titles. Former ESPN editor Dan Rafael expressed a very similar sentiment not but 1 or 2 days ago, but the same applies. By definition, what makes an undisputed title fight an undisputed title fight is that all the world titles are on the line, and a franchise designation that was cooked up last year by Mauricio is not a substitute. In order for Teofimo to achieve true undisputed status, he would have to fight Devin Haney for the version of the title that he possesses. And I don't expect that to be the very next fight this weight delivers us. I don't see Devin and Teofimo locking horns in their very next outings, in their very next fight. I view that as what could be a super fight that takes place at 140 pounds a few fights from now. The plan seems to be for Teofimo to move up to 140 in his very next fight. And if he does, it's conceivable that whatever world titles he won last night are titles that are going to soon become vacant titles, affording fighters like Gervonta Davis the opportunity to become full-fledged world champions in the lightweight division. You hypothesize that if Gervonta Davis defeats and unseats Leo Santa Cruz, he will make a return thereafter to the lightweight division, as that would be an easier weight for him to make. And for Gervonta, that's his best bet at becoming a full-fledged world champion at 135 by fighting for a title that no one's holding. I think the same is true for Ryan Garcia, who's supposed to be in action very soon this fall against Luke Campbell in what is a WBC eliminator of some kind. Surely a victory would move the winner of that fight up their rank standings, and for Ryan, that could eventually see him becoming a world champion of some kind at this weight. Before, you couldn't have given Ryan any kind of odds against a Vasyl Lomachenko or a Teofimo Lopez, as those are fighters who are further along and more well-developed in their careers here today than Ryan is. Ryan is still earning his stripes. He's about to be in a coming-of-age fight with Luke Campbell.
He's not ready for those guys yet.
He's a talented young fighter that shows a lot of upside, high ceiling, and a lot of marketability. Don't get me wrong. But here today, Ryan is not ready for a fight with either Teofimo Lopez or Vasyl Lomachenko. He won't be ready for fights with those kinds of fighters for some time, till he himself is more maturated. Teofimo Lopez has single-handedly changed the landscape, altered the topography of the lightweight division, and now the lightweight division is an open book. And while I myself don't necessarily agree with the judges' scorecards, that doesn't change that Teofimo Lopez achieved a monumental victory yesterday. He has not only changed the landscape at 135, but established himself as a major player in the sport of boxing. We'll discuss more of the aspects and aftermath of this fight moving forward in the days and weeks to come.